let me throw an idea at you, and this is for entertainment, not for the hip hop heads, but is there, and I ask you this, I don't have an answer, but you're more versed than I am, is there somebody in just popular music or in R&B or, you know, a solo artist that lines up beyond just the hip hop genre?
Against LL?
Mm-hmm.
For that period of time?
Mm-hmm.
Man, for a 17-year run or 16-year run from 84 to 2000. Sheesh. I mean, dude, like Michael Jackson. I mean, you know, literally, like it's you know, Prince. Like it's on that level. It's on that level for a person to have a 15, 16-year career like that. Madonna. I mean, you know, but that's to me like why. So LL coined the term GOAT, right? Like he's the first guy to coin it. He put the album out. And
I think an athlete, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't like a famous athlete, but LL brought it to us. LL brought it to him.
Well, I mean, for hip hop, certainly he's the first to apply it, you know. But people don't take that claim seriously. Whenever they have GOAT discussions, LL is very rarely mentioned. But I've said for a long time that LL needs to really seriously be in the conversation. When you talk about that dude's span, his career, the diversity of his catalog, he could battle rap. He ended careers. Like he could have like love songs, ballads. He did the first hip hop ballad. He was the first breakout hip hop superstar. That dude,
and
like,
he led with those joints too. Like, you know, they weren't just, you can't just point to the album and say, oh yeah, he had that lyrical, you know, spiritual miracle song. No, I mean, he made that his single. He really put his career and his image on the line with, you know, every creative choice like that.
Yeah, I mean, that dude, like, in my mind, he has as big a claim to the title GOAT as anyone in hip hop. Period.
I think hip hop will always be a voice for the people.
Okay.
You can't use my phone. You got the Tyrone thing going on.
Yeah, man. That's back when we used to be able to go to coffee shops and people be trying to jump on your Wi-Fi.
Right. Right. Oh, is that what your hotspot connection is called? But you can't use my phone?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's a good conversation starter.
That's pretty funny. I used to do Kanye West. Or Kanye's phone. Just to like mess with people, like in airports and stuff like that, get people looking around and stuff. Yo, is Kanye here?
That's funny. I might steal that.
Yeah, but you can't use my phone. That's pretty good too. I like that.
And if anybody ever runs into me, the password, and this is the only thing that this is the password for, is Ambrosia. So if anyone sees that and you watch this podcast, you get free Wi-Fi just by entering that code.
Yeah, you just upped us by like 10,000 views, man. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I'm Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia For Heads, and with me I got Jay Payne. Welcome to our podcast. Welcome. What's the headline? Episode 9.
Yeah, we're up to 9 already.
That's crazy. Yeah, man. So it's been a crazy week. We had Luda versus Nelly last night on the Verzuz. Probably the one I look forward to the least out of it, if I'm just going to be honest about it. You know, I checked in periodically, and for the songs that I heard, they were definitely, you know, putting on a great show. Complimentary, very complimentary, like Erica and Jill and RZA and Primo, which is cool, man. I don't think they should be like dudes like really going at each other and stuff like that, but it's great to see them. But what did you think of the part you saw?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, Nelly was having Wi-Fi issues early on, and I was like, you know, certainly with Jill and Erica, it was worth the wait for me. No reflection whatsoever on this battle. I mean, more than 400,000 people tune in every time I looked, but sort of like you said, I mean, this wasn't one that was designed for my taste per se. And I thought that Luda was going to take it all along. And yeah, I mean, it was good. I was reminded of so many songs that I had forgotten about from, you know, the early 2000s, especially on Nelly's part. And yeah, I mean, just good for hip hop. And Luda, I don't know if people caught it. Luda dropped some unreleased stuff, including a joint that Timberland produced called Silence of the Lambs, which featured little just that punchline delivery that I mean, Luda has one of the best rap voices and kind of cadences, you know, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, Luda is underrated just in general. People talk about like underrated MCs. That dude can spit. His flow is crazy. He's got like incredible charisma. Like I think he's a really, really underrated MC. You know, and you hear it when you
Mm-hmm.
listen to his catalog. Part of it though is that we talked about this last week with Justin too. Is he doesn't have, in my opinion, like a classic album. He's got like good songs, and a lot of his good songs are really features, even more so than his own content. But what he does do, he shines on.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And yeah, I mean, it was cool. I love the fact that this is kind of like standard programming every week. And I don't think there's one lined up for next week yet, or this coming week, I should say. But afterwards, Swizz got on live with Snoop Dogg, and they were kind of throwing around the idea of Snoop versus Busta Rhymes, which, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I would definitely tune in for that one.
That's really interesting. He's very thoughtful about this. He goes for people of the same era every time. Literally almost to the year. Like Luda and Nelly, like both were popping like 2001 or so to like 2004, 2005.
Yeah, yeah.
And Busta and Snoop. Busta's biggest hits were probably like solo, at least, were probably like 99, 2000 up to like 2004, something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he still had joints on Big Bang, the Aftermath album, which is probably my favorite piece of that Busta's ever put out. It's my take. But yeah, I mean, and really in the last 12 years, whereas Snoop has been super prolific, Busta has done some mixtapes, but really kind of sat back. And, I know he said it was going to be 2019, but I do believe this album that, Dre is overseeing is going to come in 2020. I hope. I mean, Busta, people are ready. So
yeah, I've also seen 50 versus Ja Rule as one thrown out there. First of all, do you ever think they would do it? And if they did, like, what do you think that does? Like, I think that could do 1 million. That could be gigantic. It could be really one of the biggest.
Oh, I think more than 1 million, but I don't know how. I think honestly turn into like a roast off. Like I don't know that those two guys are gonna let the music speak when there's so much bad blood. And they both really know how to troll each other. And but that would be the event of all events for quarantine in terms of live virtual entertainment.
So you think that one would be pay-per-view?
I mean, I got $29.99 for it. I don't know if I'd go $69.99, but I'd tune in for that. But I don't think 50 would ever do it. I think that 50's, even though he's made peace with, Fat Joe and the Lox and specifically Jadakiss, and I think that that day will never come. I mean, their problems are so deep, and these guys truly want to put each other out on the street. And I do believe that, I don't know about you.
Well, you think even now, like it's been what, like 15 years or so since whatever it was, what sparked it? I can't even remember what sparked it.
Yeah,
I mean, I know it was stuff behind the scenes about Murder Inc. and stuff like that, and 50's issues with, we don't need to get into, too deep into it, but you think it still lingers now?
Yeah, I mean, it does, just because there was, life-threatening violence, as far as I understand it. I mean, alleged. Yeah, I mean, honestly, you could make a great case that, 50 and G-Unit really knocked Ja Rule and Murder Inc. off their block, and Irv Gotti. And, I mean, those guys have been able to be around and relevant. I mean, New York was a monster hit, in I guess 2004, 2005. But I think the first thing that people think about with Ja Rule, or at least the second, has to do with 50 Cent. And there's no coming back from that. I mean, even I think it was Ali from the Saint Lunatics, this week was talking about like past rivalry and a little bit of bitterness between Luda and Nelly. And we've seen like 3-6 Mafia and Bone Thugs and Harmony, who are slated to battle. I mean, there's history there, but nah, Ja and 50, I don't believe it'll ever happen.
Well, musically speaking, who do you think his takes that one?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think if you bring in that million audience that you're talking about, I think it's a really close race. I personally lean 50 just because I like, hard, more rapping than, and not for nothing. I mean, 50 kind of took some of that Murdering Blueprint. Like 21 Questions is very much out of the Ja Rule playbook, but
this is how we do think, all of it. Like, yeah.
But I think
sing-songy hooks.
Yeah, but and not for nothing. I mean, Ja has those hard joints too, like especially the stuff he did with J and X, Murdergram and what is it, 1-900. You know what I mean? I still think 50 takes it, but I think with a million people in the room and the underdog effect, Ja does better than maybe it sounds like on paper. And we talked about that with DMX and Jay-Z recently. There's a lot of people that want to see X win, and you want to see the person on top get knocked off. And yeah, Ja's waited for that. But I do believe 50 Cent would think that this battle is far beneath him. And like I said, has real kind of street origins that aren't cute enough to make it a Swizz Beatz and Timbaland produced Verzuz.
Mm.
Plus, last thing, I mean, like you said, 50 Cent's about $1. And I don't think this would ever happen on a platform like that. It would be closer to kind of like what you said of like pay-per-view.
Yeah, I could definitely see 50 trying to make some money from it. I like 50's music more. I certainly listen to his albums more. But dude, Ja Rule, he was dominant for like a good 2 years or so on the radio. Like he just like had a formula that was working. And I think that between his own stuff, the diversity, the features, I don't know, man. I think 50 had probably, well, I don't even know that 50 had bigger hits, right? Like in the club, like I don't know that it was any bigger than like I'm Real or
Holla.
Yeah, Holla, or like or the Ashanti stuff, like Always On, and stuff like that, Always On Time. But I think Ja Rule's got more hits, more diverse hits, and in terms of charisma. So I met him probably like 2011, something like that. He had just come home. He had been away for a minute, and it was definitely not peak Ja Rule. It was probably, I don't know, 7-8 years past his peak, and
yeah,
he was one of the most charismatic, entertainers I've ever met in the room. He just lit up the room. Just his voice, his smile, like everything. So I think he would definitely hold the camera too. It would be a real tough one.
Do you think that, 50 still to this day has a hive? Like, I knew people that drank effing vodka because 50 was behind it. I knew people that put down Gatorade and picked up vitamin water because 50, benefited. I don't know that Ja Rule has a hive like that, but I also think that Ja Rule, if you grab somebody on the street, and you ask them to name 5 50 songs and 5 Ja Rule songs, I think on average, they're going to probably come up with more Ja records for the reasons you just stated. But I don't know that Ja has people that are really passionate about him the way that 50 does. 50 has that mixtape crowd. Then he has the aspirational crowd. It's different. And Ja Rule, I think there were a lot of people that were very entertained by watching him kind of squirm during the Fire Festival stuff, and Ja Rule's more of just kind of like a moment in time pop star, even though you and I both know that he has joints. I don't know. It would be an interesting battle for sure. And like I said, I mean, I would absolutely tune in, and if they had bad Wi-Fi connections, I would wait. I would stay.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Fire Festival because I had completely forgotten about that. Like, I don't know that that really tarnishes Ja. People's memories are so short now, and the catalog it does speak for itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I saw a lot of headlines, even in the hip hop space, about that, and that could be like hashtag Slow News Day stuff. But also, I mean, I don't know. Did you watch either of those documentaries?
Yeah, I watched them both. Yeah.
I did too, and Ja does not come off as the smoothest guy in those, I can say. And
Yeah.
I think that it was kind of gratifying for people to do that. And also, one of the things I really admire about Ja Rule, it was a few years ago. You and I actually debated whether we should cover it on AFH. He did that. I don't know if it was the Super Bowl. It was some big TV event, but he did that Foot Locker commercial where he was the Uber driver.
Wait,
And
he was an Uber driver and a Foot Locker I don't remember that.
damn, now I'm mad we didn't cover, because it was a great commercial where Ja Rule's driving an Escalade, and he's like, you kind of see him in the mirror, and he's talking about how, everybody gets their 15 seconds. And then at the very end, they reveal, and he lets people out of the Escalade, and he says, please give me a good rating. And it was like this comical commercial. And I was like, I don't think Ja Rule needs a bag. I really don't. But I love the fact that he was willing to make a commercial that 3 years later I'm telling you about.
Hmm.
You never saw that?
No, I don't think I saw that one. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I gotta see it to see what the spirit is,
Okay.
But I mean, like his rapper Big Pooh said, no shame in driving a Uber, even if that's what it really is. So.
That's an interesting segue right there. As we talk about Swizz and Verzuz, during the last week, Swizz threw out an idea that is by no means new, but it was about, providing sizable, I'll call them like almost gratuities to hip hop's pioneers. And I think that he mentioned, Kool Herc by name, Grandmaster Melly Mel, who celebrated a birthday last week, and one other, trying to think, but there's a lot of pioneers. There's a lot of people that are behind the reason that you and I are talking today, and the reason that we've worked together for close to a decade, that despite their contributions to the culture are having to do other things to earn a living. And these are folks that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, I've known for a fact pioneers that have had, FedEx and UPS jobs and things like that. It's a really interesting concept that's lingered in hip hop for a while. What do you think of it?
I'd seen like references to it as like reparations or something like that, which, so to me, I guess the question is who pays, right? Like, so if it's reparations and you're looking at it like as something that like, artists are owed from past um, grievances, then I think it's record labels, publishing companies, people like that, because these guys built a multi-billion-dollar industry and never ever reaped any of the benefits from it. They were literally kind of robbed of that. I don't see that happening, just like I don't see actual reparations happening for slavery or anything like that. I just don't think that people are prepared to go back and right wrongs. I don't think people are built that way. But what I do think needs to be in place is kind of a pension plan, something that is set up for artists where, they get, money back or a percentage, almost like an additional kind of social security, once that's paid into, maybe it's based on streams or album sales or, radio airplay or whatever it is, but just like, putting a little like something away each time there's something like that triggered so that they'll get access to it later on when things aren't as rosy. I think that could be huge and is well deserved, especially for like pioneers like that. But how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. And you and I spent a lot of time in 2019 and 2020, amplifying people like Wale that were suggesting for healthcare provided by the labels. Freddie Gibbs brought it up too, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I mean, I do believe that there needs to be some sort of a program like that. I you know, I always worry that pensions really don't exist to our current generation in the future. Like, I grew up, in Pittsburgh, which, had a huge, steel industry, very blue collar. And a lot of those steel workers lost their pensions, just because of what happened and how that money was handled. And, I don't know that I trust the record industry. I don't know that, anybody who knows a bit about hip hop does, but there has to be a way, for people that made this possible to not have to beg online or beg in the streets. And beg isn't the right word, but lean on help. Everyone needs it. And we are in a position right now to pay our pioneers. This isn't Robert Johnson. This isn't, somebody. And I think rock and roll has done a decent job of that. I think jazz, although there's maybe less money involved, has done a good job of that. We really need to hip hop. And, I've heard stories of some of the pioneers, charging money for appearances and charging money for interviews and stuff like that, and really being guarded with their stories. And I'm in favor of that, even as a journalist. Like, there has to be something that they have to leverage, and not all pioneers put out an album or a single or music that gets sampled.
So, if you don't look at it as reparations or pension, I think another thing that Swizz and LL were talking about, that's a different kind of spirit, is them actually, maybe the current generation owes something to their predecessors, because without them, they wouldn't be here. So do you think that that's another way to do it, that, like, guys who are really successful now should kind of pay it backward?
Yeah. And I think we see that, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I'll say this, like, I'm somebody that's not a Macklemore fan. He's made music that I respect and I like, but I got to give it to the guy for putting, Kool Moe Dee, Grandmaster Caz, and I think it was Melly Mel, on the song, and then bringing them to perform it at a high level. I can't remember if it was the Grammys or the American Music Awards, but, you hear stories like that. You hear stories of, okay, making producer, instead of, sampling this song, I might sample Top Billin' by Audio 2 and put a check in those guys' pockets. Like, I do think artists are very mindful of where they spend their money, but it could always, always, always be more and greater. And I'd like to see more of that, because, you and I have covered a lot of the generational discussions in hip hop, and oftentimes there's just not an education, and there's not an intersection for the Waka Flockas and the Pete Rocks to understand each other. And I think if there's this sense of obligation and gratitude of paying it backwards as well as forwards, we look at things differently.
Yeah, I like the concept of, people kind of respecting their elders and having and putting their money where their mouth is too. But
Yeah.
I just don't know how it's executed. I think about the fact that, first of all, you can't dictate which artists are going to do it, unless you like make it mandatory. Then I'm not sure that it's all that effective. But then I also think about, okay, who then is deserving of the payments? Like, you can't be arbitrary and just say it's this person, that person, and this person. Like, how do you decide who gets it? And should a Melly Mel or Grandmaster Caz, if they get reparations, then should, like, someone like I don't know who from that era, like an LL, should LL get reparations too? You know what I mean? He's from a similar era, but clearly in a very different financial state.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you slice it up?
Yeah, it gets really tricky. And I thought of it, and this could be, pandemonium, which is what's going on, with so many states and at the federal level right now. But if you put that money in a fund, and people can apply for it. But here's the thing, that somebody's got to be willing to be the bad guy or bad woman, because, if there's a pot of money, everyone might go for it, and somebody has to say no, or somebody has to say, you know what, you started in 1984. That's our criteria, is it ends here, it ends in 82, or it ends in 83. or sorry, we're not doing photographers, or we're not doing promoters, or, you know, graffiti artists. Like, it gets really tricky, and it's great in theory, but who's willing to put their neck out there to dictate and say no? And that's a challenge. And I'm not saying that Swizz or whomever isn't up for it, but something needs to be done. But I would like in the next decade to see, you know, especially with the names that we all know and we've talked about in this conversation, I'd like to make sure those people don't have to worry for, or you know, they don't need anymore. You know, their bills are kind of covered. It might not be glamorous, but they're the reason we're all here. They're the reason that, you know, AFH exists, and the reason that Rock the Bells exists. I'm glad that LL stepped up and said he would be 100% down to support it. You know, that's big on his part, because he is absolutely one of those pillars of success. Maybe not from the very beginning, but from, you know, hip hop's, you know, growth period.
You know, I met him once, and he is truly about the culture. Like, it was shocking to me. Like, you know, first of all, he programs, and I think I told you this. He programs every single song on Rock the Bells, the radio station. Like, I mean, like, everyone has to be approved by him, which is insane. Like, for him to be that in touch with the music and to care that passionately about it. But he really is about the culture. You know, a lot of people throw that term around and everything, but he's a fan, a student, and feels obligated to continue to advance the culture, even, you know, almost 40 years later after his debut. It's pretty crazy.
It's remarkable. And I mean, even, you know, you and I spoke about Luda versus Nelly, as Nelly was having Wi-Fi issues, which, you know, I've had my share of in this podcast. I went and I tuned into LL's live, and if I'm not mistaken, he was taking questions from fans. You know how, like, when you jump on live, you can ask if, you know, like, share your screen, as if, you know, Questlove's going to stop DJing, or DJ, you know, D Nice to let you. But I think LL was taking fan questions, and yeah, I mean, he really represents this culture on a personal level. And I've turned on Rock the Bells, and I have found extremely underground and esoteric and off the beaten path hip hop, new and old, played on there. And you know, I think it's a great station. I loved Backspin. I think Rock the Bells is even better, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You know, another thing that he and Swizz were talking about was he wants someone to battle, to find to battle him. So, you know, we talked about earlier about how Swizz has been very intentional about matching people era for era. But when you think about a dude like LL, you know, Rock the Bells and Jack the Ripper, and you know, those songs came out, you know, and I Can't Live Without My Radio came out like 1983 or so, you know, and he started to pop in '84. But then he had a run that went pretty much like he had a cold streak for maybe like a year and a half between like 88 or so, right after I'm That Type of Guy and Less Than Zero soundtrack came out, and when he dropped the album with Marley Marl, Mama Said Knock You Out. But aside from that, and a year and a half these days, that's just a break. That's an album cycle. The dude had a run from 1983 until 2001 or so, when he had Love You Better.
He had a #1 album with GOAT in 2000. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and the song with with Ashanti too, right? Paradise.
Okay.
Yeah, so like, I don't know that anyone has ever had a run like that, like a 17 or so year run. That's crazy. Like,
and as a solo artist, never in a group.
Yeah, I don't know who you even put up against him.
You know, it's funny because, like, you can look at your Cubes and your Dre's, but they have that benefit of the group catalog. And to me, that's not an even match battle. And I'm not saying that because I think, you know, they would win. So there's that. And then you look at them, and I kind of rack my brain for consistent solo artists of that same timeline of like 84, 85. Because I think I Need a Beat came out in 84, if I'm not mistaken. You got Too Short. And all respect due to Short Dog, but he was never on the level of L, you know, in terms of, you know, mass recognition and true global hits like that. And yeah, I don't know that there's anyone that lines up with L. Same with Ice-T. I mean, Ice has been doing it a really long time, but Ice has gone 5-6 years without a hip hop album. And again, no shots to Ice, but Ice never had a record that was that huge after what, like 91? So L's on a level of his own. And I've really thought of that. And I'm like, who could he possibly, because, you know, the Kanes and Rakims didn't, you know, you can make the argument for Rakim, I suppose.
He did not have that kind of longevity.
No. And you know, I mean, Rakim was the only vocalist in his group, but yeah, I don't know. Rakim's last album was 2009, and he's put out a handful of like Lucy since then. But L, you know, has put albums out in the last decade, and that matters. That counts for something. And L's first album was, you know, what, 2 years or 3 years before Paid in Full?
Yeah. Paid in Full is like 87 or so. So yeah, like 3 or 4 years.
Let me throw an idea at you, and this is for entertainment, not for the hip hop heads, but is there, and I ask you this, I don't have an answer, but you're more versed than I am, is there somebody in just popular music or in R&B or, you know, a solo artist that lines up beyond just the hip hop genre?
Against LL? For that period of time? Man, for a 17-year run or 16-year run from 84 to 2000. Sheesh. I mean, dude, like Michael Jackson. I mean, you know, literally, like it's you know, Prince. Like it's on that level. It's on that level for a person to have a 15, 16-year career like that. Madonna. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
That's to me like why. So LL coined the term GOAT, right? Like he's the first guy to coin it. He put the album out. And
I think an athlete, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't like a famous athlete, but LL brought it to us. LL brought it to him.
Well, I mean, for hip hop, certainly he's the first to apply it, you know. But people don't take that claim seriously. Whenever they have GOAT discussions, LL is very rarely mentioned. But I've said for a long time that LL needs to really seriously be in the conversation. When you talk about that dude's span, his career, the diversity of his catalog, he could battle rap. He ended careers. Like he could have like love songs, ballads. He did the first hip hop ballad. He was the first breakout hip hop superstar. That dude,
and
like,
he led with those joints too. Like, you know, they weren't just, you can't just point to the album and say, oh yeah, he had that lyrical, you know, spiritual miracle song. No, I mean, he made that his single. He really put his career and his image on the line with, you know, every creative choice like that.
Yeah, I mean, that dude, like, in my mind, he has as big a claim to the title GOAT as anyone in hip hop, period. Yeah. Like, you know, number of hits, you know, chart success, all, like, you know, could take it to you, give you that fire. Like, you know, you didn't want it. He stopped careers. Like, he ended careers, multiple careers. Like, the dude is he's crazy, you know.
He is, and
discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, recently, you know, he did this great interview with Sway in the last year and, you know, kind of alluded that he was picking a lot of his samples and had a little bit of the hand in the mixing. And, you know, L does so much more than people immediately come to mind. And yeah, and I don't know why, you know, it's just not as sexy as an answer as putting, you know, your Kanes and your Rakims and your Nas and your Jays, like the usual suspects, to the point where it bores me. Like, you know, so many top 5 lists just feel super cookie cutter. And L, I don't hear his name, even GOAT for sure, you know, belongs in that conversation, but I don't even hear his name enough on the top 5 conversation.
Yeah, and he reinvented himself so many times too. Like his rhyme style was very simplistic when he first came out, as was the case, you know, Run DMC, like simple, like cadences, like, you know, 2-syllable rhymes, you know, not like multisyllabic, you know, rhyme patterns and stuff like that. But then, you know, you get to the Jingling Baby and, you know, Mama Said Knock You Out era, and he's like really stepped up his rhyme style, you know, after following, you know, Rakim and Kane and stuff like that. And then he made the transition that they weren't able to make, which was to become a really successful 90s rapper, KRS more so than Rakim. But, you know, but I'm talking like massive radio hits, you know, with like, you know, 4321
Yeah.
and, you know, all the stuff
I Shot Ya.
yeah,
Yeah.
on that album.
Ill Bum.
Yeah, I mean, and then being on the remix with Biggie, you know,
Yeah.
Flavor in Your Ear and Craig Mack, Flavor in Your Ear, like the guy, man, he was super, super versatile, unbelievable.
He is. He is. And I mean, I love the fact that, you know, he's somebody that we can tune into all the time. And he's truly just a cultural ambassador. And yeah, I don't think there's anyone that can battle. And you know, we talk about 50 or Jay being above certain battles. It's funny that you have LL out here like, I want in, and there's
Yeah,
no one that's on his level. You know?
nobody on his level. And there's the fashion part too. You know what he did for FUBU. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, being this gangster is like advertising FUBU
Even
in a
you know,
Gap commercial.
yeah.
You remember that? We did the piece on that, like how he, you know, he
Yeah.
said Gap is for us by us, and was like
Yeah.
had the FUBU hat on, like he was a beast, man. He still is. But so going back to the battles. So do you think for a guy like him, and even for Snoop, right? Because we talked about this a little bit with Snoop versus Busta. Do you think that to keep it kind of, you know, in theme and on brand for what Swizz has done with these, they should limit their catalog? Like, should Snoop have two battles, right? Someone to battle him from 93 to 2000 and then from 2000 on, because he has two completely different catalogs too, pre and post death row, um,
I don't think so. I think you get one. And I mean, you make a great case for it, but I just don't think that it's feasible. I mean, honestly, I'm very curious. I hope that this concept lives on, but when the world opens up again, I don't know if everyone's going to be so eager at, you know, 8 or 9 o'clock on a Saturday night to tune in. You know, even me in the house, sometimes I'm just like, man, you know, like literally I got to stop this movie or end this conversation and tune in. I don't know. I think everyone's going to get one battle. And if there's a great narrative that emerges out of these of like, wow, you know, so-and-so crushed so-and-so, you can make it competitive. But I think with Snoop, you know, respect due to his catalog, but I think he gets one. And there were a lot of people out there, not for nothing, that said not Ja versus 50, Snoop versus 50. I think 50 might have even said that himself a few weeks back. But that, as you, I'm sure, would agree, like, you know, Snoop has a 6, 7, 8 year jump on 50, and that's not interesting to me. I mean, 50 can't compete with the Doggy Style sound or the Chronic sound.
well, okay, so then let's advance it 10 years. You fast forward 10 years after LL, there are two dudes like nipping at his heels in terms of longevity. One is Snoop, because Snoop really, you know, kind of kickstarted 1992, right, with Deep Cover.
Yeah.
And so like he's right around, and he's still relevant. He can still put out a joint now
Mhm.
and have a hit. He had the Little Duval joint
Yeah.
last year, gigantic, you know. So
Best life.
let's give him 18 years, right?
Okay.
And then the other dude is Jay-Z. Jay, you know, I would say for me, you know, 96 when Reasonable Doubt dropped. 96, 97. So he's got like a 14-year run. Even though he was around before that, I know he was around like, you know, significantly before that, but like when people really kind of locked into him, it was right around that 96, 97 era. Um, you know, so 14, and Jay is, you know, he took time off too, but his retirement was also a year and a half or so, you know. So those are two who could stand with L in terms of like that longevity.
Yeah, I mean, the Jay thing interests me more. I think that Snoop has, you know, hits for sure, but sometimes they're a little bit more spread out. In recent years, yeah, that, he caught one with Katy Perry, and then he had the Young, Wild, and Free with Wiz. Jay versus LL is crazy to me because, there's history there. L kind of spoke about it himself on that Sway interview. That would be nuts to me. And I know that.
Wait, what's the history?
Just that they weren't the closest of guys. L is extremely competitive. Jay is extremely competitive. And so you have that at the onset as it is. And, not for nothing. I mean, Jay, in addition to Jazz O, kind of came up under Kane, so he has a different lineage. And then you have in the mid 2000s, LL is still a Def Jam artist, kind of figuring out where to go. I mean, at this point, we're 4, 5, 6 years after the GOAT album, and Jay is the president of Def Jam. Mm-hmm. And Jay didn't, as I understand it, make a ton of friends while doing that. You had guys like LL and DMX, and then you had your Redmans and your Method Mans and the Roots and all of these groups. And Jay was trying to, take Def Jam to a new place. And I think that rubbed L in particular the wrong way. I mean, L didn't get that open with Sway, but he suggested that there's tension in the past and there's a respect now, if I'm paraphrasing correctly.
Mm-hmm. So you think LL versus Jay?
Man, that would be huge. But again, I mean, we've said this in several episodes of the podcast. I don't think Jay would agree to do this. Maybe for Tidal. It lives on Tidal and Rock the Bells. But L, I imagine, L doesn't strike me as a guy who turns this down, especially just the narrative that we've talked about. I think he wants his smoke. He wants his competition. But Jay, I don't know. And I don't think Jay currently has an Instagram account. I think he may have had one in the past. So I don't even know if Jay is watching these things unless he's got some burner account that we don't know about.
I'll tell you who really, okay, I got it. This is who really should face off against LL Cool J. And their eras almost align perfectly. So LL, let's say 84 to 2000, 2001, or 83. I got a guy who is 87 to 2000, maybe 2 or so. 2000.
Hip hop?
Yeah. And they have a very tight-knit relationship.
Rakim?
Nope. Dr. Dre.
Yeah, but how do you go solo versus group? I don't know that it matters, but that was what was so dope about, Nelly and Ludacris, or, Dre.
I don't think it matters. I mean, dudes are playing so many features and stuff like that, right? So it's not really just about their solo catalog. It's really about any record that they have a verse on. And it's verses, so, you start with Dre's catalog with NWA, and you go through the solo stuff and the features with M, and I think that in Pac, I think that's a really, really strong battle, and they have a great history together. They're great friends. Yeah. It would be a lot of camaraderie, very complimentary, but I think that would be just massive for fans.
I agree with you on the friend part. I think it gets tricky. I mean, what is Straight Outta Compton if it's just Dre? And I mean, that's one thing, you got Bone and 3-6 battling, just let the record play. And that, not to change the subject too much, but that's one thing that I'd like to see these do differently. I mean, the stories are great, the camaraderie is great, but I mean, technology is possible. I want these battles to have a little bit of a human touch to them. I think it would be dope to see them just deliver the bars a cappella sometimes, instead of it just being a playlist battle. So, and I'll leave that to here. One of the things that's been kind of lingering, a conversation that goes long before 2020, is Kane versus Rakim. Mm-hmm. And, utmost respect for both of those guys. At a performance level, I know for sure who wins that battle. At a catalog level, I think it has a different winner. What about you?
So performance level, I'm assuming you're going to say Kane.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and by performance, you don't mean just spitting the bars. You mean the whole total package, right?
Yeah, but but also within the confines of what this could be, you know, what a produced Instagram live thing could be, of like, you know, almost like a freestyle, you know, like almost kind of like what Guapdad is doing, you know, like Kane could murder that, just the way that he delivers and his timing and his charisma. Yeah, but I mean, on a concert level. Yeah.
So we have these on AFH, right? We used to do the Ever See, where we go and dig in the crates and find these like really rare clips of artists of, you know, all eras. And we have examples of both Kane and Rakim rhyming on the street a cappella, like in a true cipher for people.
Mm-hmm.
And both just killed it. Rakim did The Punisher, and Kane did I can't remember which one Kane did, but both were incredible. So I don't know that Kane outright takes that just in performance. When it's all out, when they're on stage, then, you know, Rakim is like kind of in his pocket and not moving and, you know, doing whatever. And a lot of times, we now talked about this, he'll have the crowd finish his rhyme instead of doing it himself. But Kane is still like jumping, spinning, dancing, dropping to his knee, the whole nine. He's still the ultimate showman. So I see, just on a pure performance level, him taking it. But if it's just them going verse for verse, a cappella, I think it's gonna, because Ra is so smooth with it, his voice is so laid back and everything. I think it's gonna be pretty even.
Yeah.
But I would love to see that.
That's true.
I would love to see that.
Yeah. I mean, Kane's answer, I think, was always, I think it was Kane more than Rakim, like somebody put the money up. And, you know, this could be great. And here's the other thing, too. I would love that, regardless of who wins. And, you know, Jill and Erica, the unanimous, like everyone I talked to was like, there was no winner. It was just great. You know, we said that. I've heard it, other podcasts, other just friends in the street. But the cool is afterwards, their catalogs went up considerably. And, you know, Luda and Nelly, you know, those guys are hit makers galore. I hope people pay attention to some of those deeper cuts. But with Kane and Rakim, just hip-hop fan to my core, I want people to do the knowledge. I want people to know the catalog, and I want that streamed and celebrated. And both of those guys, as far as I know, the vast majority of their catalog is on DSPs. It's available. Like, let's get that music celebrated. Let's give it its moment. And that could be a real byproduct win.
Well, that kind of goes back to our conversation about reparations or pension, right? Like, if for people of that era, there could be a fund, you know, like just like a tip jar almost for them, and they could raise. I could see them raising like almost $1 million on this, man. Everyone gives $1 to get in, like kind of like the Erica concert or something like that, or just as a voluntary tip. That's $500,000 for Kane and Rakim each. Like, I think that would be meaningful to those guys, you know, like in a 3-hour thing. So I would be all for that, man. All for it, you know. And I
like that idea.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they're getting a cut of the merchandise. Like, you know, you see these verses, you see the pin for the merchandise go to the store. I'm wondering if participants get a cut of that too.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have not clicked on that link, but I like that idea a lot. And, you know, I mean, we've come off of the era of crowdsourced albums and things like that. I mean, nobody did it bigger than De La Soul. I like that as a concept of, because there's so many people too that, you know, I was just thinking about it. I've seen Rakim live a number of times. I've seen Kane live a few times. I've never seen LL in concert. And I don't know if I'll ever get that chance, you know, but to throw down $1 and feel like you supported something, to see an artist on concert that means something to you, whether battling or otherwise on the phone, that's a brilliant idea. I really, really like that.
I saw LL open up one time in Miami for R. Kelly.
Oh, wow.
That was a pretty crazy concert.
Was it a good concert?
I mean, it was great. It was great. You know, I'll tell you another person that coincides with L's era, but you know, and I think LL would respect this. I'm not sure that fans would see it on the same level. Like, true hip hop fans would be like, yeah. But like, I think the mainstream, I'm not sure. But Scarface.
That's a real, like, and I don't know why, because you can make the same case that Ghetto Boys, NWA, both groups, but to me, that's that's an interesting battle.
Yeah.
Again, I've spoken of this over several of these kind of proposals. There's an underdog effect, though. And in my mind, both Scarface and LL are underdogs for conversations as the GOAT. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's interesting. That's really, really interesting. And I did see, I saw this week, Scarface put a video up that appeared like him on a boat fishing or something. So I hope he's, as we've talked about in recent weeks, you know, battled COVID. I really hope he's on the up and up because, man, there have been so many passings related to COVID and otherwise in 2020 that are nuts. But that's a great idea. That's a really, I think LL would probably like that idea too, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, let's see if we can make that happen. Yeah, another thing I'd like to make happen, man, is you know, I want us to, we should after this, we should think about AZ. You know, AZ recently he put out a new song, his first official single, I guess, from Doe Or Die 2, which is has been teased now for 11 years, something like that. And to my knowledge, I don't know if there's been an official single release for it, but Found My Niche dropped on Friday, and the project is going to have production from Pete Rock, Rockwilder, Bink, Buckwild. Guests will include Rick Ross, T-Pain. They didn't say a date though, right? Did they say was there a release date?
Not yet, but you know, I do believe it's coming from, you know, what I've kind of heard. And yeah, I mean, A has teased this album since 2009. At times, you know, he mentioned like really kind of waiting on trying to get like Dre, who, you know, he worked with the firm, trying to get Premier, who he had done a lot of things with, you know, in more recent years. First of all, I like the single. I don't know what you thought about it.
Yeah, I liked it. You know, I'm anxious to hear more, especially like the Pete Rock, you know, and Rockwilder joints. I think those are going to really speak to me even more. But yeah, I liked it.
You know, AZ's put out a lot of music, you know, in the last decade, and some of it has been these street albums, which, you know, he kind of has said like, you know, I don't, you know, as we talk about catalog, like, don't include that in my vision. Then he's put out a lot of like Lucy's and like mixtape covers and things like that. I'm excited for this because Doe or Die 2 came out of the conversation in 2009 when you had Raekwon, you know, put out the Purple Tape 2, you know, Only Built for Cuban Links 2. And then immediately after, Raekwon executive produced Capone and Noriega's The War Report 2. And, you know, AZ, who's very close with all of these guys, was like, man, I'm going to go back to my baby, my first album, and make a sequel, which, you know, I think that AZ is one of these artists that hasn't wavered at all in quality. I think that, you know, his delivery is crisp. He still has really authentic, interesting things to say. I want him to get one more jewel in his belt, you know, one more jewel in his crown. And I would love 2020 to be a year where people really look at AZ's contributions on his own, you know?
Yeah, I agree 100% about his ability. Like his ability has stayed at the same level for years. He's had no decline. So, you know, given that, like a lot of people stop because they lose their passion and lose the skill. It doesn't seem like he's lost either. What do you think has been the source of his reduction in output?
You mean what's kept him sharp?
No, what's kept him from putting out more music?
Yeah, I don't. It's funny
like
too.
Redman too, right? Like I mean, these guys like he and Red are super sharp. Like they're just as good as they've ever been. But the output is sporadic, you know, and they both have been promising. Like Red has been promising Muddy Waters too for a bunch of years, and that hasn't come to fruition. So what do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it makes you wonder. Like these guys, these are probably two of the most like longest anticipated albums that I can think of. You know, A is longer than Redman, but they go back like well towards a decade. And then if you like put anything else out, it seems like your fans get mad at you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, Redman put out a project, you know, at the end of 2015, and everyone was like, yeah, but what about Muddy Waters 2? And, you know, AZ, I'm not sure it's quite as bad, but, you know, he mentions this in 2009. Then in 2010, he does this kind of like pump fake where he did a Doe or Die 15th anniversary. And it had, you know, kind of like some reworkings on there, but also some new joints in the spirit of. And I feel like that diluted the excitement. So I give him credit that he waited this long. And when you see those names, like you said, Pete Rock, Buck Wild, Bink, Rockwilder, like I'm excited, you know. A spit a joint last year on Eric Sermon's Vernia album that was really tough. And he's put out these Lucy's from time to time that we covered on AFH. And yeah, I mean, AZ is just cool. I saw him not too long ago at a dinner that Raekwon had, and A is you know, he's one of these ageless, timeless artists that just feels like an era in hip hop, you know.
Do you think that it's after a while it's the detox effect, where the album has gotten so much hype and there's so much weight under it that artists just don't believe they can ever meet the expectation, or they put so much pressure on themselves that there is paralysis of analysis? It's kind of like what happened with D'Angelo.
Yeah, I do. I mean, and I think that there's a reason why you see artists stopping. They're getting away from releasing so many details far in advance, you know, and that was very much a trend of a slower moving hip hop media of like, yo, yeah, my next album's going to be called Good Ass Job. You know, my next album's going to be called Detox. And it whets the appetite, and it becomes a marination for the fan of like, oh, okay, what comes after? And now I feel like artists are tortured by it because their lives can take turns. The sound can take turns. They can get in a pocket with a producer and be like, nah, I'm not doing Good Ass Job. I'm doing, you know, 808s and, you know, like I'm doing a whole other thing, and it becomes super limiting. And I do think that Doe or Die 2 will be dope. I really hope that Redman, you know, does his Muddy Waters 2. But I don't know that you're going to see a whole lot of sequels at the high level, not at a mixtape level, to come after this, you know, especially from our veterans, our OGs.
Yeah, so another thing that happened yesterday was Ice Cube is America's Most Wanted. There's a celebration of the 30th anniversary on IG Live. Did you check that out or no?
I did. I tuned in a few times. You know, just like everyone else, just like you and me, you know, Cube had some technical difficulties, but it was really, I've loved what he did on Twitter throughout the week, dropping facts that I personally didn't know about America's Most Wanted. And then
remember some of the ones that stuck out?
Yeah, I mean, Chuck D did a lot of the scratches on the album, which I thought was dope. You know, and I may have read that and you know, all these books and things like that, but it wasn't top of mind to me. And you know, Chuck D was part of the Bomb Squad, and people forget that. They always think of, you know, Hank and Keith Shockley and, you know, Eric Vietnam Sadler and, you know, Bill Stephanie, but you know, Chuck is a producer too, so I thought that was really dope. And then what was it? I don't remember who was Bill and who was Ted, but the dude that was not Keanu Reeves shot the video for Who's the Mac.
Oh, wow.
The curly hair dude. That was who would have known. So that's yeah, cool. I mean, I encourage anyone, go on Twitter. Cube tweeted a lot of ill photos, gave props to a lot of people like Run DMC, Sir Jinx, you know, the Bomb Squad. He said that, you know, if Sam Sever, who was, you know, the producer at Def Jam down with Third Base, you know, if he would have not stood up Cube at a meeting that they had scheduled and after his NWA fallout, that he would have never hit on the Bomb Squad. You know, he never would have tapped them to do it. And actually, when I read that this week, it made me pull out all the Third Base records and like try to imagine that in my mind, you know?
Yeah, it's really crazy. Dude, there was so much excitement for that album when it dropped. Like, Ice Cube, for a lot of people, was definitely the heart of NWA. He was the engine and why people thought they loved them. Now, when he left, like, it gave them a chance to kind of shine and show what they could do without him, and I think they surpassed most people's expectations. Like, Dre was just so good of a producer. You know, Ren was super underrated as a writer. He wasn't political like Cube, and you know, tended to skew more toward the misogynistic stuff that we found on the EP and the second album that you and I referred to in the past. But he could put together a rhyme scheme like pretty crazy. But so when Cube left, everyone was waiting for it. It was almost like some kind of anticipation for Snoop's album, and then for him to be a West Coast artist unifying with like the top East Coast production unit at that time was just like it's like the dream team, And I gotta admit, it took me a while. I was a little bit. It was jarring. First of all, it's just a really aggressive and dissonant album. That's just the Bomb Squad style. But then also, like I was used to Cube on the more soulful samples and that Dr. Dre sound, and it wasn't G-Funk yet, but it was still rooted in soul. And so it was weird for me to hear Cube like that. And so I gravitated toward the slower, more laid-back songs like Once Upon a Time in the Projects and You Can't Fade Me. But yeah, it was a great album, and everyone was really, really psyched about hearing Cube in that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I ask, is it the first quote unquote angry rap album of that level?
Well, what do you mean by angry rap?
Yeah, I mean that's tricky, but like Cube, coming out with a hardcore message like that. And the reason I say the word angry is I look at that album and I think it's so brilliant because it's the total package. Like you can look at the cover, you can look at the title, you can look at Cube's expression and get a sense of what you're about to hear. And it's got in a different way than you do with, Long Live the Kane or, Paid in Full looks like the album sounds, the cover. But this was different. Like this took rap to a different place. And, I was too young at the time. I probably first heard America's Most in 96 or 97, 6-7 years after it came out. But I'm asking you, like, did that create a new paradigm?
Well, so I would frame it different than anger. I would say protest, right? And really kind of outspoken. And I think what it did was, so there had been a few examples of it before, right? One, it was Public Enemy, Yo Bum Mercer Show and It Takes a Nation of Millions. Chuck was the voice, the Black CNN, to use his own words, and the voice of the streets and what was really going on with racism and systemic oppression and stuff like that. And then, a lot of people, the reason why they call and think of Straight Outta Compton as a classic is because it was also rooted in that kind of same kind of politics, but that was definitively Cube's influence, right? F the Police and Straight Outta Compton, the political themes out of there were written by Cube, and those were his voice, right? So that's why you saw the split and NWA sound when he left, because Ren was more the street and profane, and Q was the protest and profound, So Q went all the way with it on that with the Bomb Squad, who, as you know, architected Public Enemy's sound too. So that gave him license to go all the way in on the political protest type music. And so I think it was the first West Coast expression, pure West Coast expression of that. Straight Outta Compton started it, and Cube evolved it into a pure form. For me, Ice Cube was at his best with Death Certificate, because Death Certificate blended it blended a lighter side of Cube. He had more jokey stuff on there too, so he was more well-rounded, and just sonically it felt more West Coast to me. It felt more aligned with what Cube's true musical sensibilities were. But America's Most Wanted was one of the most important albums because it was that platform for expressing what America represented to young Black men at that time, with the KKK and the Americas, which is a nice segue into, I think, the last thing you and I wanted to talk about, which is the Atlanta child murder series on HBO. I know that's been out for a little while. I just finished it up this weekend, and you'd been ahead of me on that. And you didn't live through that era either. No. So I would love to hear your impressions of it, just because I gotta imagine, aside from Mindhunter, which we both like, season 2, which was centered around that. This must have been one of your first real extensive looks at that case.
Yeah, I shared with you and Justin in the last episode. Mindhunter opened that up to me, and that's, I, that's embarrassing to admit. That this isn't something I learned about in school, and even in just like reading of serial killers or things like that. So then immediately after Mindhunter, there was a podcast that was unofficially related that is very popular called Atlanta Monster. And now they've done the DC Sniper and some others after it. And I listened to that the whole way through, which that podcast, like I said, pointed me to Andre 3000 mentioning it on Travis Scott's album. So of all the things, then I come back to this series, and it was very, very new to me to realize the probability that members of the KKK were behind it, and that Atlanta in 1980, 81, 82 was going through a tug of war of what is the city's identity at a time when you had, such Black prosperity. You had this, these oppressors that wanted to do otherwise. And that was just what was so chilling to me about what I learned in the HBO, docuseries.
Yeah, watching that Mindhunter season opened up new things for me. Like, growing up, we all, when it was happening, thought it was the Klan. Most Black people thought it was the Klan coming in. It was Georgia. It was their MO, and it seemed like it was that, and it was terrifying. It made it a national crime for us because the Klan was everywhere, right? So if it's the Klan doing this, even though it's happening in Atlanta, it could happen anywhere. And I was, 10 at the time, so like right in that age, and like it was one of those first like things that like hung over you as like an existential threat. Like someone could literally just snatch you and just kill you. So there was that. And when Wayne Williams was identified as the killer and convicted, it was a head scratcher for a lot of people. Like it just seems so completely foreign and against what our kind of core belief systems were. But then they entered all this fancy evidence and everything, and the jury was a mixed jury. It was plenty of Black people, so and then the murder stopped, and so it seemed like maybe they got the guy. But then in watching this documentary, you see the politics that were happening behind the scenes and how they were resistant at even acknowledging the murders at first. And then when they did, without spoiling it for people who are going to look at it, just to me, what it left me with was it was very clear that one, there was more than a reasonable doubt. There was, if all the evidence had been introduced, there was a ton of doubt, which then, by our legal standards means that he should not have been convicted. Because, unless you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone's guilty, then they're not guilty. And, maybe he did some, maybe he didn't, but like, based on all the evidence, like there was definitely huge doubt. And that's another travesty. But, as I think about it, let's say that it was the Klan or someone white who did something. I don't know that, especially back then, and because it still happens now. Well, we see it as recently as George Zimmerman, and we don't know what's going to happen, right now, with the Ahmaud case. But back then, in early '80s Atlanta, Georgia, are they going to convict a white person of killing young, poor Black kids? There's a high possibility that the person wouldn't have been convicted if it was a white person. And that would have destroyed Atlanta. It would have set off riots across the country. And so you can see huge political motivations for not doing that, And so it just, I don't know, it was a pretty wild, eye-opening, disturbing documentary, but I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, I mean, it stayed in my mind for all the reasons you just said. And I also think, and in the Atlanta Monster podcast, they interview Wayne Williams a lot. And, Wayne Williams is a a weird guy. You know, he's real. Even in those interviews, like he asked for as much time as they interviewed him at one point to talk about an artist on the outside that he was promoting. I mean, he's just not. I don't think he has that likability factor, and I wonder how much that was used, especially if he was innocent, as a pawn to play to the media, you know, through the media to put it on this guy. And, you know, the main piece of evidence they have is a splash, which I could tell you right now, I hear a splash behind me, but that doesn't mean there's one there. And I'm not exonerating him either, but it just really makes you wonder. And yeah, that documentary, that docuseries definitely made me want to pick up books and read more. And they opened up the case, you know, in I think 2019 or 2018, and it'll be interesting to see if anything develops out of that.
Yeah, at this point, I think it's too much time passed. You know, the evidence collection methods they used back then, you know, it's just not. There's not enough, I think, to really like find anything concrete. So, you know, unless I don't know if there was DNA that they could collect or whatever, but even so, even if you know, when you think about Central Park Five, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't until someone literally confessed to the murder that those kids were free. There was no amount of evidence that could be, you know, used to prove their innocence in their minds. And even then, the prosecutors who were behind it refused to believe it when a person confessed to it. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, I mean,
yeah.
so you know, unless something like that were to happen for Wayne Williams, I don't see him getting out.
It really does make you wonder. Well, you know, shifting gears for 1 second. I mean, we've talked about battles and a few things. Some new music did drop this week. Did you hear anything or come across anything that really stood out for you?
You know, I was kind of you sent me some stuff that Deontay Hitchcock, um, that really spoke to me. I thought that was like super dope. You know, most of my new music came from you this week. You sent me a couple things. We added some stuff to the playlist too. What else? You know, the Apollo
Paulo Brown
Brown
and Che Noir.
and Shay Noir and Black Thought. I mean,
Yeah,
Black Thought's best verse of the year so far. I think he needs to do. He did those projects with Salam and Ninth. I think he needs to add Apollo Brown to the list of producers that he does work with, because he and Apollo made some magic together. You know, so those were probably my top ones. How about you?
yeah, absolutely. You know, Deontay's whole album is really, I think it's called Better. It's been heavy rotation for me. JID's on there, Jid. You know, Black is on there, some different folks, and it's just got a great sound to it. And one of the things I like about Deontay too is he has his own producer, who's been with him for years. This guy named Brandon Phillips Taylor, and he's very versatile sound. Likes to sample, likes to twist with, you know, distort vocals. I love that. I just love it when you see an artist that's new to the game making noise, and they've got somebody with them. I mean, that's in the, you talk about hip hop tradition, but yeah, I think Deontay got a lot of recognition for working with Dreamville during the Revenge of the Dreamers 3. And, you know, he's been on my radar for a year or two. JG, one of the contributors at AFH, you know, put me up on him in 2018 with a song called Thinking About You. And Deontay is dope, part of that whole kind of new Atlanta sound.
Yeah, yeah, it's great, man. Atlanta, like, is super diverse now too. You know,
With Earth Gang and Jid and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Jid is one of my favorite rappers of the last 5 years. Like him and Reason, like the two of them are just like crazy.
You make a really good point too with Apollo. I think Apollo Brown, I mean, he's been doing it for well over a decade now. I mean, close to, I think, 15 years. And we watched Odyssey. I mean, his label mate at Mellow Music Group. You know, Odyssey has gone on to work with J. Cole and, you know, allegedly produced the Kendrick J. Cole song that has not come out. I want Apollo to get that recognition. And I think Apollo is a traditional producer in that, you know, artists that he works with, like your OCs and your Razkaz and Sky Zoo, you know, they work together like in the same studio. So I don't think he's like a beat shopper, but I would love to see him work with somebody like Black Thought. And in addition to Thought just killing it, Shay Noir doing what she does best, and you know, one of the artists that's bringing Buffalo further along with Griselda. You know, Apollo just brought his A game on that joint. That's actually my song of the week.
Yeah, word. That's your song of the week.
That is my.
I guess I can't use it then. So then I'll go back to the Atlanta child murders documentaries. And episode 3, there was a sample that I heard, really soulful, a song. And I was like, yeah, like who sampled this? I know it was like late '80s era, and I kept thinking EPMD, and I was looking through EPMD's catalog, and I couldn't find the song, and I couldn't remember the name. And then I thought, K Cello, you know, he was part of the whole like Def Squad clique, and the song was Fugitive. And I forgot what a great storyteller he was too, and just how penetrating and clear his voice is. But the song Fugitive, that's my song of the week.
Man, that's dope. Well, the year's heating up. We got some you know, good music coming out, and in the meantime, you know, hip hop is leading the way for other forms of entertainment and other just cultures with the way, you know, they're handling quarantine and this crazy year that is.
Word, man. The culture always moves things forward, and it's great.
Amen.
To see. Yeah. All right, man. Well, be well.
You too.
And look forward to connecting later on in the week.
You definitely will. All right, man.
Yeah, man.
Peace.
Later.